All right, kids, we're going to talk about the years from between 1942 and 1943 during World War II. Just some key battles and turning points in the war. So let's see what we have here. All right. So when we look at the key battles and the key turning points, you remember now we're fighting a war on different fronts. All right, this World War II, the U.S. involvement. Last time we talked about after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and so the Axis forces were defeated in three key battles. So we have the Midway Islands in the Pacific, El Alamein in North Africa, and then Stalingrad in Russia. All right. So Midway Island, that's one of the turning points in the Pacific because remember after Pearl Harbor, Japan sort of had a dominance in the Pacific and all the islands in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. All right, so Midway Islands, the Americans beat this powerful Japanese attack or navy, and they destroyed over 5 aircraft carriers, which is a huge deal. All right, of course we see the statistics here with 400 aircraft, 17 large warships, and an invasion of 5,000 troops. All right, now the Americans only had 3 carriers, 233 planes, and um, to destroy 4 of the Japanese carriers and about 330 planes. All right. So why in the world, with the Japanese having outnumbered the Americans in not only troops but also weaponry, is because the Americans actually broke the Japanese code, the radio code. So they knew exactly when and where the attack was going to be. All right. And of course, the Japanese were a little overconfident. Um, and they made 2 mistakes. They split their forces. So anytime you split your forces, um, it's going to cause the opponent sort of to be able to um, go in and attack a lot easier because now you have split forces. The Americans to concentrate on the main carrier forces, and also the fleet was extremely vulnerable. All right. So, well, like I said earlier, the Midway proved to be a crucial turning point in the Battle of the Pacific. All right, um, it weakened the Japanese Navy, and the Americans were able to maintain their lead now that they've broken the code, the Japanese code. And under General MacArthur, they began to recover the lost islands in beginning in August 1942, and he had his military strategy, which was known as island hopping. All right, which it was going from one island to the next to sort of recapture and to seize them from the Japanese. All right, so that's a very important strategy um, enacted. And here you see the Allied counterattacks in blue, and then the Japanese and Japanese control areas you see here is the pink. All right, and so these when the Allies went on the offensive in their island hopping campaign. So now we definitely see that the Americans sort of were on the offensive. All right. So El Alamein was in North Africa, and basically in 1942, the Axis powers they tried to capture the Suez Canal, and this was a very strategic point because they would be able to gain access to the Middle Eastern and Persian oil fields, which we know oil is very important during war. All right, and we know that Erwin Rommel was sort of the leader of the Axis forces in North Africa, and the Africa Corps, excuse me, they tried to break through. Um, However, they were chased out of Egypt for good by the British and New Zealanders at the Second Battle of Alamein. Very important. Um, several reasons sort of why the Allies were successful in this battle. They had a lot of reinforcement and air power. Air power was very consistent, and they were able to attack their supply forces and sink their ships as they crossed the Mediterranean. All right. Um, and for the Axis, there was a food shortage, fuel, oil, and ammunition. So if they're not being supplied with these resources, it's kind of hard for them to supply the military and um, continue on the offensive. So this is one of the reasons that the Allied power sort of won. All right. Now, of course, this was another turning point in the war. All right. It prevented Egypt and the Suez Canal to falling into German hands. All right. And of course, it made it difficult for the Axis forces in the Middle East and those in Ukraine to sort of link up. All right. Now, this led to the complete expulsion of Axis forces in North Africa. All right. And it threatened the Germans and the Italians on the west. All right. When the Eighth Army closed in on them from Libya. All right. So now the Axis powers sort of were trapped, and the Allies were ready to invade Italy. And then Stalingrad. All right. Of course, this was the southern prong, so to speak, or the southern offense that Hitler was going to take into the Soviet Union. I remember it was a three-prong attack. All right. Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad. And it was reached actually by the Germans in August 1942. However, this was one of those battles in which the Russians refused to surrender. They fought to the very end because they knew it was one of the most critical areas that they had to hold on to prevent any kind of defeat. All right. They counterattacked, trapping the Germans, actually, whose supply line was dangerously extended. So not only that, not only did they have that fighting spirit, but they also had to fight on limited resources. I'm speaking of the Germans right now. All right, with the supply line cut off, the German commander von Paulus, he had no reasonable alternative but to surrender. All right, and that was on February 2nd, 1943. All right, so if Stalingrad had fallen, there would be a supply route for Russia's oil would have been cut off. So Russia would have been without any kind of resources. All right, and with the German defeat, it stopped this attack. Now, this was very important, all right, because once again, when Germany invaded Russia, the German army had picked up a lot of momentum and felt that they were sort of invincible. And this sort of proved that they were not, because at one point in time, the Soviet Union's army was looked upon by the world as very mediocre and really not ready to handle the attack of the Germans. But defeating them at Stalingrad, and of course we know the harsh winters in Russia, all of these factors played to the advantage of Russia, which now helped them to become victorious. All right, so now Germans sort of were outnumbered, and they were short on supplies, and they were driven out of Russia. So now we're starting to see these three key battles that turned the tide of the war to the Allied favors, and eventually led to victory. All right, for the Allies. And that is it, my friends, in my German accent. Have a very good one.